questions from my other videos, or if you're interested in it in general. This video will explain or give you an idea, a little more of a grasp of what Dungeons and Dragons and roleplay exactly is. This is to answer the what is it question. Is it a tabletop game? Is it a parlor game? What exactly? How does it work? So I'm going to be the first thing I'm going to be doing is just describing to you exactly what it is. Then I will talk about some of the specific rules, and I will end by recounting a story of one particular scenario that I ran to give you an idea of how it works in progress. And of course, as with all of my videos, whether you're interested in D&D or not, I will try to speak softly, so whether you're interested or not, you can still be relaxed and be induced into a ASMR state, shall we say. Alright, so first, what is D&D? The answer is not exactly simple, for there are no direct examples, or that there is no. D&D is a very original game. There's nothing else that really comes immediately close to it. But to explain the idea, it is you have one person who is telling a story, and they're usually called the dungeon master or keeper or game master. And so you have one person telling a story, and he's telling a story to a group of people, usually from 4 to 6, sometimes to 8. And so he's telling a story to a group of people, and those people interpret the actions of characters in the story. So the dungeon master will describe something that's happening, and the other people say what their characters do in the story. So it's in the way that skills and events in the story are decided are through a series of rules, usually through, or pretty much always through, the rolling of dice. And the rules, depending on exactly what version of roleplay you use, can get either very complicated or very simple and open-ended, but pretty much all roleplay games use polyhedral dice. These include 20-sided dice, 12-sided dice, 8-sided, 6-sided, 4-sided, 2-sided, and even percentile dice, which when used, 10-sided, but when percentile are used in conjunction with a 10-sided die, then it becomes a 100-sided die. So it gives you a lot of, well, you roll dice and how to explain it. Well, let's say if a player says he wants to try to climb a tree to observe the surrounding territory, what he would do is say he has a climbing skill or an acrobatic skill. Climbing the tree has a certain difficulty. It could be, we'll say it's 15, so he was going to take a 20-sided die and try to roll above 15. nobody can understand it explained to them. They have to see it or hear it in action. But that's the very basic idea of it. Players enter a scenario or an adventure with a set of skills, and they talk with the DM, and they speak about how their players react to different situations. So an example of Dungeons and Dragons in action, or a scenario, is one fight, or as part of an ongoing, or let's talk about campaigns for a second. Before I give you a full understanding of how it works with an example scenario, campaigns, or you can see this isn't, the ideas of RPGs are not easy to describe. So first I will tell you about I'll give you the example scenario, and then I'll go back to talking about D&D in general, because I want to try to avert your confusion or shorten, curtail your confusion. Alright, so in a campaign that I'm currently running, there are several players, and this is going back several weeks ago, but these 6 players, I believe, their names are, or the characters' names in the game are Dalewin, Robert, Lupin, Noxley, and Dawn. These are the players in this group, and it is a medieval fantasy setting. So this, as part of the larger ongoing story, they were traveling from one city to the next. So as they're traveling, I tell everyone to make to make a nature roll, which is they're using their nature skill to see if they can detect if anything's wrong or to see if they can sense an ambush or that sort of thing. So I tell them to make a nature roll. So all the players, they make their rolls and add their skills, and it turns out that Dalewin, who is a ranger, an elfin ranger, detects that something is wrong. So I as the dungeon master, I say that the party stops, and Dalewin looks about and sniffs the air for a moment, and he kind of gestures to everyone to lay low and stay quiet, as he whispers that he smells smoke ahead. So as the players, the guys that were sitting around the table were trying to figure out what to do, and we'll say, as they're figuring, I'll introduce each of the characters to you. So first you have Dalewin, who is an elfin ranger, kind of like Legolas from the Lord of the Rings series, except a little less gay. So he carries a bow, he's a ranger, he's skilled in nature, and I love Legolas, by the way, he's awesome. But so you have Dalewin, he's an elfin ranger, skilled in the forest, and he's a wood elf. Then you have Robert, who is a Goliath. And they're basically a tall barbarian race in the D&D universe. Robert is a very powerful Goliath, bearing a massive two-handed sword. And the next player is a Lupin. He's a changeling who is basically a humanoid, and he can't change forms yet because he's a very low level. But Lupin is a rogue. Oh, and Robert, by the way, is a fighter, a warrior. I'm kind of like Conan the Barbarian, you could say. And Lupin is a rogue. He is kind of a thief, an acrobatic character. If you play the Assassin's Creed series. And he's basically an assassin. And finally, or the last two are actually NPCs, which means they're non-player characters. They are Noxley and Dawn. And, or Dawn, Coney, and Noxley. And they're both scholars that are being escorted by the rest of the players, the other players. They're scholars, they're very poor in combat, so they're basically just following and kind of cringing behind the rest of the party. So, these players, they kind of slink off the road into the forest, and they all want to try to hide, so they make a stealth check. They pass, so I say that they blend into the forest quietly and stealthily. So then, as they're kind of looking ahead, they send Lupin, who's the sneakiest of them. He has the highest stealth skill, to sneak ahead and see what's going on. So Lupin he makes a stealth roll, and he successfully sneaks forward, and he sees the burnt out remains of this wagon. So he comes back and he doesn't see anything else but just the remains of this wagon. He doesn't see any kind of ambush or anything else still in the area. So he comes back and he tells everyone else that there's, the remains of a wagon ahead. So everyone decides to sneakily try to kind of creep through the forest and check it out and see if there's anything. Just to approach it cautiously, so everyone does so. They sneak up and check out the wagon before finally leaving the woods and just poking about among the ruins. So looking around, they see that it's kind of burnt out a bit. There's a lot of supplies that are just kind of ravaged and scavenged around, and they can see one of them makes a nature roll, and Dalewin succeeds, and he looks around and he judges by the tracks that there are many kobold and goblin footprints on the kind of sandy dirt road around the wagon, and he sees that there's been an obvious struggle. And not to mention, of course, there's a human body, lying dead on the side of the road, crumpled up and very fresh, that everyone else can tell. But Dalewin sees that there's a very obvious massive chest which has been drug off from the wagon and dragged into the forest. There are these large, deep edge marks which leave in the dirt that lead into the forest. So the party kind of gets together and they try to figure out what they want to do. When they finally decide to go into the forest and investigate. So Dalewin has the best nature, so he's the most observant, so he goes forth with Lupin next to him, since he's so stealthy. And they sneak forward as kind of the scouts, and the rest of the party follows behind at a good distance, so they won't spoil their stealth. But so Lupin and Dalewin are sneaking ahead, and there's a series of events when Dalewin and Lupin finally cut back, and they know that there are kobolds and goblins right in the forest, almost on top of them. So they gather the party together, and Noxley and Dawn, since they're scholars, Robert tells them to just sit under a bush and hide during the fight so they won't get hurt. So both of them make stealth checks and just try to hide under them. So by the way, something that comes up later is Dawn one of the scholars is a bit of a hothead. He is a scholar, but he kind of sees himself as a possible barbarian warrior, so he carries around this fancy club. this point, he hides behind the tree, kind of sullenly. He wants to fight. So this comes up later. So they're looking around, trying to. They hear some rustling in the bushes, and they can't, as they're trying to hide as well, and they can't quite tell if the kobolds are near them or not. So Dalwin does an acrobatics check, and he climbs up into a tree, and he finds a perfect position that just has a perfect overwatch over the surrounding area. And he looks over, and he immediately sees that there are about 9 kobolds and goblins in a little warband that are about 20, they're about 40 or 50 feet away, coming their direction in kind of a spread out pattern. Most of them are bearing javelins, and though there are 2 that are armored and carry swords. Dalwin tries to signal quietly down to the rest of the party and signal wildly that there's a group coming their way. So everyone else kind of readies their weapons, and they look up, and immediately the 2 parties just come to see each other, like face to face. Though there's a good gap of space between them. So Dalwin successfully hides while he's up in the tree. He pulls out his bow to kind of start sniping. But immediately all 8 kobolds just unleash a hail of javelins upon the party. Most of them were already kind of under cover, so, but those that weren't just successfully jump behind trees, and the javelins, the kobolds' javelins just sank into the trees and down into the dirt and just fell all around. So then immediately, Robert the Goliath made a not so intelligent decision. Right after that first shower of javelins, he decided to jump out and rush into against the kobolds. So he drew out his massive 2-handed sword, leapt from behind the tree when it came to his turn, and he bellowed out a massive war cry, and he just rushed straight into the crowd of kobolds, and he tried to start laying about with his sword. But the thing was, as soon as Robert charged right into the middle of all this crowd of kobolds, they all turned to him, drew out their javelins, and just showered him with spears. And Robert just basically cried out with a "oh crap!" as 16 javelins from each, since each kobold had 2 standard actions, 16 javelins flew towards him and 8 hit him. So Robert was pin-cushioned, but he struck off a couple of the javelins, and he was a brave warrior, so he continued to fight on. He took on one of the 2 armored kobolds head on, and was just fighting ferociously with him, carving into him with his massive sword, and trying to, while he was trying to guard his injuries from himself from further harm. So Dalwin at this point was taking arrows and unleashing, just firing away from his position in the tree down into the kobolds, as he's trying to just shoot as many arrows into them as he can, taking as many out as he possibly can. And also at this point, so Lupin tries to sneak around Robert and the rest who were fighting, but one of the kobolds spot him, and the other armored kobold kind of breaks off from fighting Robert, and he charges straight towards Lupin. And Lupin steps out of his way and trips him, but this other kobold leaps up, and they just start wrestling together, and they're just wrestling about on the ground, neither really getting an advantage. So Dalwin is up in the tree shooting down on the kobolds. Robert is taking them head on in combats, and Lupin is wrestling one of their other strong kobolds down on the ground. And at this point, this was when Don, who is the hot-headed scholar, leapt into action. He jumped out from behind his tree, and Don, by the way, up to this point has been kind of the Barney Fife of the campaign, the goober or the Gomer Bile. He is the comic relief, who is kind of inept but is still kind of lovable. But Don just waves this two-handed club around, his fancy club around his head, and he cries out, "I will help you, my friends," and he just charges towards one of the kobolds. But this kobold just kind of turns around, sees him, and tosses a javelin his way. And this javelin nicks. It nicks Don, dealing 1 hit points of damage. And Don grabs his injury, and he kind of cries out in pain as he says, "Of my friends, I have been injured." And he lays a great amount of pain in his words. And 1 HP of damage, by the way, is just a scratch, literally. And this point was actually quite hilarious, for this was when Jack turned towards him, Robert. Jack is the player's name. Robert, who's the Goliath, wheeling about with this massive two-handed sword, just kind of turns toward him in the middle of the combat with 8 javelins sticking out of him, and basically says, "No way, you're injured. My condolences," as he continues his fighting. So Don continues his rush forward, and he actually is extremely lucky as he bonks one of the kobolds on the head and kind of stuns him a bit. But the way that the fight ends heroically is Robert finally kills the kobold he's facing. He scares another couple away, and he just rushes over to the kobold that Don is fighting and just impales him through the back and tosses him down to the ground. Then Robert, with these javelins still sticking out of him, strides over to Lupin, who's still kind of wrestling and stabbing against this other kobold, and he grabs Lupin, grabs the kobold by the scruffs of their neck, rips them apart, throws them both to the ground, and then impales the kobold with his massive two-handed sword. And finally, one of the last kobolds is running away. Dalwin killed and another few with his arrows. But this last kobold, he was just fleeing for his life. Robert rips a javelin out from his own body and then just hurls it towards the last kobold. And as it so happens, this last kobold had one of Dalwin's arrows sticking out of his shoulder, so he was already injured. So Bob threw this javelin, and it buried deep into the back of this last kobold, who fell down dead. So Robert as of this fight, gained a huge reputation for being completely unbeatable. He was amazing, though he took an unbelievable amount of damage. So that is a example scenario of just one small fight that I had in the campaign that I'm currently running. And the way that D&D games work are you'll have players meet to in a session, and in each session you handle like different scenes of scenes or fights or different parts of your game. And as you keep meeting with and playing the game in different meetings, the story starts to eventually form as the players are going from one quest to the next. As the sessions build up, you'll eventually start getting a campaign out of it. I know one friend of mine and the campaign that his father started is still going on with his son. His son is continuing his father's campaign. So I personally know games or campaigns that have been ongoing for about 40 years or so. So D&D campaigns can go on indefinitely as long as you are still carrying on that storyline. And so let's see. And again, if you're still confused or aren't quite sure how D&D works, or which you probably aren't, then that's perfectly fine. And the only way to really understand it is to play a game of it. And even if you don't, it's still enjoyable to read about or to listen to, or at least I found that it's enjoyable to listen to other stories, or to listen to the stories that have been developed out of other D&D games. And still, even if you don't find these games to be particularly appealing to you, or if you don't like listening to stories as much as you like telling them or writing them, then again, that's perfectly understandable. And I simply hope that you will enjoy the whispering aspect of this video, and that it will relax you sufficiently. So again, feel free to comment with any suggestions or ideas that you have